The 1863 civilians of Gettysburg were reluctant witnesses to the great battle. Join Ken Rich, the man in the red shirt, for his historic town walking tours. You could book these tours by emailing ken@gettysburgtownhistory.com. That's ken@gettysburgtownhistory.com. And when you're in town, look for the guy in the red shirt.
Enjoy historical stories on the History Fix platform. Explore movies, short films, and documentaries. Addressing Gettysburg podcast fans receive an extra $5 off the first year's annual subscription. Sign up at historyfix.com and use promo code Gettysburg. Every subscription includes a 7-day risk-free trial. Escape into history with History Fix.
This episode of Addressing Gettysburg is brought to you in part by me, audiobook narrator Mike Scott, narrator of Savis Beattie's Bloody Autumn, the Shenandoah Valley campaign of 1864, and Unlike Anything That Ever Floated, the Monitor and Virginia and the Battle of Hampton Roads. If you are an author or publisher interested in having your titles produced as audiobooks, or even just in learning more about the process, give me a shout. You can find my contact info on my website, MikeScottVoice.com. That's MikeScottVoice.com.
And Civil War Trails. It's the world's largest open-air museum, and they offer over 1,300 sites across 6 states. Drive the Gettysburg campaign turn by turn, paddle to Frederick Douglass's birthplace, or hike to remote earthworks and artillery positions. Visit civilwartrails.org to request a brochure and explore their interactive map. Follow Civil War Trails and create some history of your own. All 3 episodes of Addressing Gettysburg are brought to you by our sponsors and our patrons over at patreon.com/addressinggettysburg. To become a sponsor, send an email to matt@addressinggettysburg.com. And to be a patron, go to patreon.com/addressinggettysburg today. And we thank you in advance.
You're listening to Addressing Gettysburg.
All right, 5 minutes. I guess I need to get this out of my system, right? So we can get started. Laura, there's some seats down here, darling. You about waited too late. I thought you were getting a coat. Now you done brought vodka. However you like. Are those 2 open, sir? Oh, Laura Lee. Wasn't that the lady from Outlaw Josie Wales? My favorite Civil War movie, Outlaw Josie Wales. You want something? I got it. Something. All right. Y'all like you like Clint Eastwood? All right. So most people can't stand Josie Wales. All right. So my favorite scene. Do not turn us on yet. You're just wondering what you got into, ain't you? Right here, Mr. Hurley over there. All right. So they're in this saloon, and the bounty hunter walks in, okay? And Josie Wales is standing there at the bar, and he says to him, the bounty hunter walks in. You know, the doors come over. You couldn't have filmed the scene any better. This is cinematographic perfection right here. And he comes in, he walks through the door, and he goes, I'm looking for Wales. Josie Wales is over here, you know, next to the bar. You know, he's standing over here by the bar. I don't have a bar, so it's have to be the bar. He goes, I got to do it right. You got to have your hand down here, you know. He goes, Clint Eastwood goes, you a bounty hunter? Man's got to make a living. Here we go. Dying ain't much of a living, boy. Now that's no extra charge for the skit. I imagine most of y'all come out here to see if I'm still alive or not. What kind of wreck I've made of myself over 2022. And we're still going. right here. I'd like to thank everybody for coming out today for John Hunt Morgan. I told the people out front that we wouldn't get as many folks because it wasn't Gettysburg, but I was thinking if I got half, I'd be happy. So 90% is good. Come on down, buddy. We got seats all around. Come on. We've been waiting on y'all all day. So I've got an hour to do all this. When are you going to count me down? Whenever you're ready, huh? All right. Boss man said I should be done in an hour. I got 13 pages of material. I want to go ahead and say before I get started that I know that I'm flying, and I know a lot of people have written me from Indiana and Ohio, and the idea for this program actually came from a visitor, well, not a visitor, one of my quote-unquote pen pals that writes, and he said, why not John Hunt Morgan? And I thought to myself, that would be pretty cool to do because we could get your states in. We have so many visitors from Indiana, Ohio, and Kentucky that come over here, and you never get mentioned because it's at Gettysburg. So back to the original point. I'm going to try to fly through everything to get to the famous part of the narrative, the Ohio raid, and of course the aftermath of that. So if I'm leaving a lot of shortcuts out, I'm going to try to go fast in the beginning and then go more detail at the end. So that's the method to the madness. Come on down. We got seats down here all the way around. What about you, Ohio? Or was it Indiana? You got two right there? There's two right there up there if you don't want to walk that far. All right.
We'd like to welcome everybody to Gettysburg National Military Park. And all you people that were too lazy to come out today, that want to brave the snow and weather and everything else that goes with it. My name is Matt Atkinson. I'm from Houston, Mississippi. And my little hometown is still there. We're going to do John Hunt Morgan today. And I failed to, before I got started, to even reset the slide. So we're off and rolling right here, right? What are we going to talk about today? John Hunt Morgan. I thought since we did Nathan Bedford Forrest many years ago, that we would actually do this one. Can we take it back the live feed right now? Oh, there we go. Now, does it work? Oh, yes. So I thought a good bookend, to Nathan Bedford Forrest would be John Hunt Morgan, who is counter the rival to that. If you think about, especially if you go back to the 1950s and you go back to the 1960s, what was the focus of the TV shows? What was the focus of the comic books and so forth? It was Jeb Stuart. I don't know if you remember the, what was the name of the comic book where he had the Stuart tank and he had the ghost that came? Haunted Tank. The Haunted Tank. Hey, man, how are you? And so, you get, it was a big deal. And John Hunt Morgan was in there. And Mosby for that matter. When I got to looking into John Hunt Morgan, he struck me as a man that kind of captured everything that you'd stereotype from Gone with the Wind or The Cavalier or anything else that you might want to imagine. If you had a knight of old, it would probably be John Hunt Morgan with all of his virtues and all of his vices, which I'm going to try to tell you a little bit about today. Now, who set the tone in the South, though, before the war? It was none other than this gentleman right here, Sir Walter Scott, who my mother, whose maiden name is Scott, my middle name is Scott, claims we're related to, of course, right here. And what did he end up through Scott's pen? Quote, history was retold, the past was fictionalized, and present institution mythicized. The never never became a mode for the here and now, and Southerners cast themselves in roles that preserved their honor. They embraced the cult of chivalry to justify slavery, the hierarchical system, and the aristocratic way of life. According to historian James Ramage, which wrote the biography on Morgan, which a lot of this program came from, just to give credit to where credit's due, Scott's book strengthened the chivalric ideal and the code of the country gentleman who is characterized by hospitality, courtesy, deference to women, and defense of honor. I forgot I had another microphone over here. Another of these novels, though, was another point of these novels, though, was guerrilla warfare, and perhaps no other character in the Civil War embodied all those ideals like this gentleman right here, the John Hunt Morgan, Mr. John Hunt Morgan. He was lionized as the Marion of the South, who, if you don't know, was a Revolutionary War hero, American Revolution, which is high praise indeed. Morgan is born in Huntsville, Alabama. Not Muscle Shoals, because they've got the Swampas. It was on June 1st of 1825. Okay, that one fell flat. The oldest of 10 children from Henrietta and Calvin Morgan, and John was named after his father-in-law, John Wesley Hunt, who was the money in the family. If I could stress anything, I gotta broach over his childhood here, though, but his father married the money. And then because the money was on the mother's side, then daddy-in-law was, son-in-law had to do whatever he wanted. And so his daddy went belly up in the mercantile business in Huntsville, with those depressions and currency speculations, all that. And that's what brought him to Kentucky, because that's where his father-in-law was. And his father-in-law, of course, owned several businesses. His father-in-law was I believe I'm correct, he's the first millionaire west of the mountains. Yeah, of the Alleghenies. Pretty cool. Oh, how are you, man? And so, in 1844, John is going to enter Transylvania College, which must have been one heck of a haul to, Romania to get over there. But that's actually in Kentucky, and none other than some of the alumnus from there in there at the same time were Albert Sidney Johnston and Jefferson Davis. Not the same time as Morgan, but the same time those two gentlemen were in there together. Morgan, when he was there, was a typical college kid. Apparently, he did more extracurricular activities than he did studying, and he even managed to make it 2 years before being suspended for dueling with the fraternity brother. Since his direct family did not have any money, John could not hope to become a planter. It's taught me a lot, studying John Hunt Morgan, taught me a lot about pre-war. The only activity equal to agriculture, as far as honor was concerned, back then was the military, right? And so that's where he's going to go. This career would fulfill the Morgan legacy of service and give John the chance to defend personal and national honor. Of course, that chance is going to come relatively fast in the Mexican War with the young men rushing to join the colors. And of course, young Morgan was right behind them. He's eventually elected first lieutenant of the 1st Kentucky Mounted Volunteer Regiment. And he saw his first and only combat at the Battle of Buena Vista, which is probably Buena Vista, but in Houston and Chickasaw County, it's Buena Vista. And I want you to know that my daddy saw Jerry Lee Lewis in a tent at a carnival in Buena Vista, Mississippi in the 1950s, before he was even famous right there. There you go. I haven't told that one before, but that's a true story. Saw Albert King, too. I ran across this sobering figure, though. One thing I want to point out before I move on from Mexico. I never realized this. In the Mexican War, 1,549 men lost their lives in battle. 1,500 men lost their lives in battle. 361 men lost their lives in accidents. And 10,986 men died of illness. That's just crazy. That's just crazy. Now think about that. In 1848, without a military career in sight, Morgan went into the retail business with a gentleman named Sanders Bruce selling china and glassware. The Bruce family lived across the street from Hopemont, which was the name of the Morgan ancestral home, and it's still there, and was considered an established, the Bruce family considered an established manufacturing family, wealthy, successful, and respected. Bruce and Morgan also invested in a few slaves who they rented out on side jobs to haul corn, lumber, and other items. They even had for lack of a better word, a crew that they sent up and down the river on various steamboats. And they would sail up and down, and then when they would have some off time, they would work these various cities. And they were not physically with them. John Hunt Morgan. In 1848, 23-year-old Morgan married Saunders' 18-year-old sister, Rebecca. And in 1853, 5 years later, she gave birth to a stillborn son. And the resulting pregnancy, or the complications from the pregnancy, resulted in eventually what would kill her. Of course, they came up with some off-the-wall diagnosis. They called her illness milk leg, which the theory was that breast milk had seeped into the leg, giving it a white or pale hue. Hey, I'm just working with what I got here, all right? So, and of course, that's not true, but she probably had some kind of circulation issues. But they tried throughout the 1850s to get her help. And she ends up dying, an easy date to remember. She ends up dying on the day that the Battle of First Manassas is fought, July 21st of 1861. Now, Morgan's millionaire grandfather died in 1849, to back up a little bit, which gave him much more access to capital. All right? In 1853, John Hunt Morgan went into the hemp business. Not marijuana, but hemp right here. Now, I would like you to know, just so I can get my claim to fame, and I have to chase some rabbit at some point in this program right here. I am, of course, in discussing the history of A.P. Hill, I was the first park ranger in the history of the National Park Service to use the word penile. And of course, during the Michael Scher presentation in the article that he published, I believe in 1957, I was the first park ranger to have a slide with a Playboy on it. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I have completed the third P right here. Thank you. All right. Yes. Okay, so like many Southern gentlemen of the era, John Hunt Morgan bought and sold slaves, bred racing horses, gambled, fought 2 duels, drank, and was noted in many circles as basically as being a libertine. This is actually my favorite Johnny Depp movie, all right? Check it out. They don't show that one on TV. Do not show it with children in there. All right. Morgan's brother-in-law and best friend Basil Duke expounded the Southern Code of Ethics when he pointed out that Morgan never attempted to be secretive or hypocritical about his diversions. And he never did anything, quote, which touched his integrity as a man and his honor as a gentleman. After the war, Duke wrote, like the great majority of the men of his class, notice how he puts this, the gentlemen of the South, He lived freely, and the amusements he permitted himself would, doubtless, have shocked a New Englander almost as much as the money he spent in obtaining them. General Morgan, with the virtues, had some of the faults of his southern blood and country. So what does that mean? He's basically Rhett Butler. All right, if you want a movie character. Ironically, though, despite the lavish lifestyle, Morgan apparently suffered from bouts of depression from time to time. So he is, human after all. Through all the 1850s, though, he continued to dabble in military-related things. He became part of the Kentucky, what we would call the Kentucky National Guard. They called it the militia back then. He was actually formed an artillery company in 1852. The governor soon dissolved the militia, and basically that dissolved the artillery company, but Morgan then a couple years later went into formed an infantry company, and they would go around to parades and barbecues and stuff and form up and parade around and so forth. So, he's involved in the military. He keeps it up even past the Mexican War. So was there any doubt, ladies and gentlemen, when what he and his comrades would do in 1861? As war loomed, they began to drill in earnest, and Fort Sumter drew the war fever to a high pitch, but Kentucky remained neutral, and therefore most of her sons also. With his woolen factories, hemp factories still in operation, he started making cloth for militia companies across the state. And still, even with the First Battle of Manassas, Morgan stayed home because Kentucky remained neutral. It was not until September of 1861 that he entered the fray when Union and Confederate forces violated Kentucky's neutrality. Now, Morgan quickly, as far as, of course, he's going to go into the cavalry, and he quickly adopts a type of guerrilla-style warfare. You've also got, when you put together a PowerPoint, always keep in mind that if you can find somebody that really likes themselves, you're usually guaranteed of a lot of pictures. And so what you're going to see here today are a lot of pictures of John Hunt Morgan that you've never seen before, because he liked to get his picture took, which makes my program a whole lot easier, thankfully, which he probably had in mind when he did it. Steady as she goes, Stuff Writer. Now, never shying away from impersonating a Union officer or adopting the other side's uniform, what is the penalty for being caught in somebody else's uniform? Yes, drumhead court-martial. He thrived on the excitement. In an engagement, Morgan is perfectly cool, related one soldier, quote, and yet his face in action as if surcharged with electricity. He had the quickness of a tiger and the strength of two ordinary men. His friend, confidant, and aide, Basil Duke, recalled that Morgan's voice would change during an engagement and take on a more forceful manner. Quote, his presence of mind and address in the midst of a great and imminent danger was literally perfect. He had, quote, a quality even higher than courage. I can describe it only as the faculty of subjecting everyone to his will whom he tried to influence. It was almost mesmeric. One of these days I'm not going to get one of these words. Over time, Morgan's men discarded the saber for the pistol and the infantry rifles, along with Nathan Bedford Forrest's men. They got rid of all that. They just found it useless. They carried little or as little as possible, and they traveled fast. His artillery usually consisted of two mountain howitzers for each brigade, and the only conveyance was the only conveyance with wheels in the whole command. Which, for you Gettysburg people, mountain howitzers like what, a quarter size of a normal cannon out here? Very light, probably what, 500, 600 pounds. Horses provided maximum mobility and the ability to employ, quote, the hit and run. When his command had to fight, they fought as infantrymen. In intelligence gatherings, he had few superiors. Scouts always rode ahead of the column, and locals were told in advance to prepare to feed his command or guide them on some back road. He employed a full-time telegraph operator on his staff. He used the communication system to sow disinformation while gathering his own intelligence. Morgan also was known to send personal messages on occasion to various Union officers and editors through the telegraph that drew his ire. If he saw an article that he did not appreciate, he would make sure once he reached a Union telegraph line that he telegraphed Louisville and told the editor that he sucked. That's not a quote. On the march, he kept a series of rolling guards, edit that out, on his flanks to guard against any surprises, always leapfrogging them forward as the column came abreast. See what he's doing? Column moves forward, guards are out several miles on the end, so on the flank, so nobody can get to him without him knowing about it. There are no surprises. No surprises. No surprises. Feints in different directions also clouded his true objectives. Now, after, the Confederates basically get kicked out of Kentucky, Morgan falls back primarily along the Green River until the Battle of Mill Springs in January of 62. His command will help evacuate Nashville, when would that be? The next month in February, and continue to harass the occupying Union Army for the next month. By the end of February of 62, he's in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. He was promoted to colonel to date from April 4th of 1862. Now, to give you an idea of the kind of person you're dealing with, though, right now, at the Battle of Shiloh, Morgan almost misses it because he decides somewhere around the last week of March that he's just going to go to Richmond, with permission or not, to Richmond, Virginia, not Richmond, Kentucky. All right, so he boards a train, he gets all the way up, he's on the way, and then he receives word that there's a battle is imminent. And you know what? My uncle told me that was in the Navy, you can do a lot of things, but don't miss the ship. Well, Morgan had to do high time back down, and he barely made it back to Corinth in order to make the Battle of Shiloh. For the most part, though, he's pretty much on the outskirts. And it's really, I don't know if it's telling because it's one of Morgan's first battles, and he doesn't have any orders, and I'm not saying he disobeys or he's sheltering, but to try to show you a little bit of difference, Nathan Bedford Forrest seeks action. Morgan does not. Now, when you get, I don't know, I guess you could loosely call Nathan Bedford Forrest a guerrilla fighter, but John Hunt Morgan is a guerrilla fighter. Guerrilla fighters try at all costs to avoid pitched combat. I'm not saying that's the mentality he had at Shiloh. He basically gets squeezed out on the edge. But he's not going out trying to get people shot, or trying to find somebody to shoot, I should say, like Nathan Bedford Forrest. He commands about 325 men there at Shiloh. From July 4th, fast forwarding to the 28th of 62. Oh, one thing before I leave this print. I once gave, this Mort Kunstler print right here, I once gave this to a friend of mine as a Christmas gift because he's a big John S. Mosby fan. And he later told me that it's not John Mosby. But I had good intentions. I just want you to know. Right there. I'm just saying. All right. He goes off on this first Kentucky raid. And as you can see, he makes a big circle through the state. And he nets about 300 new recruits while eluding a 3,000-man Union force that was in his pursuit. The people in Kentucky, the Union authorities, raised all kind of cane. They got on the telegraph to Washington, D.C., prompting President Abraham Lincoln to wire back, quote, "They are having a stampede in Kentucky. Please look to it." Now, this is important. This is the reason I'm mentioning this aid. This is July of 62. Morgan's glowing report on how the locals came out to welcome his command is going to be one of the big impetus behind Braxton Bragg's invasion of Kentucky later that fall, because Morgan told him that Kentuckians were ready to be liberated. That all comes from this raid right here. And Bragg, of course, is very confused when it doesn't happen. Now, fast forwarding a little bit, Buell's, that's the Union general's, army at Nashville, main Union army was supplied by the Louisville and Nashville Railroad. Morgan found out that the Achilles tendon of this long railroad running from Louisville to Nashville lay in 2 tunnels near Gallatin, Tennessee. Now, despite being defended by 375 infantry, in August, Morgan is going to go up there, riding through the night so he will appear at dawn. That was a favorite tactic of his, always to appear at dawn, so he would have as much light as possible in the edge of surprise. He gets up there, and without firing a shot, he captures the entire Union garrison. The important thing, and of course you've read the sign by now, is that he destroys both those tunnels, and it shuts down the Union Railroad supply line for 98 days, which if you don't have a railroad line and you got an army the size of these Civil War armies, they can't move. You can't move without tonnage, and you can't have tonnage without a railroad. And so this delays the Union advance for several months because Morgan's was successful in this. I'm pointing this out to you because I think this is Morgan's greatest impact on the Civil War right here. This raid that goes forward. Now, Morgan's command continued to grow. In December of 62, he led a surprise offensive of 2,140 men against Union General Absalom Moore's brigade of 2,100 at Hartsville, Tennessee. In a frontal assault on December 7th, Morgan lost 21 men and another 104 wounded. However, he inflicted 58 killed, 204 wounded, and captured 1,834 men in one of the most lopsided victories of the war. We might as well take this opportunity, since he's coming back from the bathroom, to welcome Matt Callery. Let's have a round of applause for Mr. Matt Callery right here of Addressing Gettysburg, who failed to be prepared for this program right here. Addressing Gettysburg is the only podcast on the Battle of Gettysburg right here, and he and his whole crew are occupying this front row. And I have a special surprise from one of the crew that's going to take place 10 minutes after the end of this program. You won't want to miss it. Right here. Addressing Gettysburg. Okay. Now, where were we? With the energy of 2 men, Morgan had no sooner returned to Murfreesboro when he embarked on what became known as the Christmas Raid from December 22nd to January 1st, 1863. The objective was to destroy 2 trestles on the Louisville and Nashville Railroad north of Elizabethtown, Kentucky. His division now numbering 3,900 men. You noticing how this command keeps growing? Keeps growing. From Shiloh, he had 300. December, he's got 3,900. He successfully destroyed 2 trestles, leaving the railroad out of commission for 5 weeks, while also tying up an additional 7,300 Union troops to help guard the rest of the railroad. As a result of his actions, these 7,300 Union troops were not at the Battle of Stones River. See what he's doing? You don't always have to fight a battle in order to aid the larger army. You can do that through other means. During these latter raids of 1862, Morgan exhibited a more reckless abandonment, taking more chances, engaging in frontal assaults, and overall showing less patience. One of the reasons behind this change may have been the same thing that vexed General Richard Ewell after the Battle of Second Manassas. John Hunt Morgan was lovesick. I got a feeling called the blues. Oh, Lord, since my baby said goodbye. Now, Southern soldiers used to get ready to print for the march. That's the exact quote, past the house of Colonel Charles Reddy, where his beautiful 4 daughters resided. The ladies used to appear on the veranda and wave their handkerchiefs at the passing men. The second daughter was named Martha, and her good friends called her Maddie to her close acquaintances. She had a trim figure with dark brown hair, fair complexion, rosy cheeks, gray eyes, and sparkling with intelligence and strength. An admirable deportment, well-educated, amiable, and pleasant, with the perfect posture and an age they wouldn't divorce you. I thought that was funny. All right. She had a coquettish demeanor. And when her father was a congressman in Washington, she set the trend by being the first lady to wear a curl on her forehead, something that I can readily appreciate right there. They got engaged on March 19th of 1862. And on December 14th of 1862, the couple was wed at her parents' home in Murfreesboro. And this is probably the who's who of the weddings in the Confederate. I would say the West. How about that? We probably got some in Richmond that would be up there. But as far as the West, I don't know how you beat this lineup. It featured Colonel George St. Leger Greenfell, an English officer of fortune, as one of the groomsmen, Corps Commander General Leonidas Polk as the bishop who was marrying everybody, who was the Episcopal bishop of the Diocese of Louisiana. I guess that's about as officially married as you can get officially married. Generals Bragg, Hardee, Cheatham, and Breckinridge all came too. 2 regimental bands provided the music, and thousands of soldiers gathered outside and cheered lustily. The dinner reception featured turkeys, hams, chickens, ducks, game, and other delicacies. Fine wine was provided by Colonel Reddy's steel stock cellar. You know how hard it was to find some Madeira by the December of 62? If things could not get any better, John Hunt Morgan was promoted to Brigadier General the day before. That's when you roll it, right there. Got a bride, and he got a promotion. Morgan stayed near Maddie for all that winter and into early spring. All right. And let me say, I'm gonna come back to her later. But you know, when I said love struck earlier, we've all read about people that have been in love. Where do you even start with that throughout history? But John Hunt Morgan and her have got such a passionate love affair that it alters his behavior. You start seeing his command decisions, or let me give you an example. The raids don't go as long. Everything is built around the idea of how fast can I get back to her. It is. And he's willing to take more risk in order to do that. But he doesn't like to be separated from them. You want me to read you a juicy quote here? He wrote her, and he said, "I am determined to have you near me." And once she was near there, Maddie wrote her relative, "My life is all a joyous dream now, from which I fear to awaken, and awake I must when my hero," that's capitalized, "is called to leave me again. My husband wants me to remain with him, and of course I much prefer it." Now, during this time period, Union cavalry is going to start to grow stronger and become more bolder. In a series of probes, that whole war thing always gets in the way of this romance. In a series of probes, they began to defeat Morgan's increasingly weaker command until morale and efficiency started to wane. And Morgan himself is going to be running into various problems. get up here. So, all right, well, this is what you call winging it. All right, so, this causes him to keep going further and further and further toward. What I did with these notes? Right here. No, that's Kim. Right here. Oh, God. Well, I can't explain it.
You were saying something about efficiency.
I was. I really was. I swear to God. I swear to God. All right. Oh, well. Well, I guess we're going to wing it, huh? He starts, though, Morgan starts taking more and more aggressive posture. He starts going up into Kentucky and he starts coming back down. When he starts doing that, ladies and gentlemen, the Union cavalry is getting closer and closer and closer to him. Now, what is the same thing that John Hunt Morgan has that Jeb Stuart has, or all these great men have? John Hunt Morgan and Jeb Stuart, just trying to relate it here to Gettysburg, both have an ego. And when the Union cavalry, they start seeking Morgan out. Morgan is actually, you know, in the winter of '62, supposed to be guarding the flank of Braxton Bragg's army. And the Union Army is crossing the river and seeking him out, the Cumberland River, and trying to bring him to an engagement. And there's really nothing he can stop them with. If I always think of John Hunt Morgan's command as being similar to, you know, like Turner Ashby's, where he's a great leader and he's very revered by his men, but nevertheless he cannot control them, or he doesn't put much emphasis on control them. So when they go up against hardened Union cavalry, they're not doing that well. Going back to Jeb Stuart, all of this Union forays and so forth, and the lack of Morgan doing anything because he won't leave Maddie, he don't want to get too far away from her, starts making the press talk bad about John Hunt Morgan. And when that starts to happen, ladies and gentlemen, when you got somebody like an ego like John Hunt Morgan's, he wants both. He wants the love and he wants the attention. And he's a gambler. What did I tell you about in his earlier life? He is a gambler. He would, you know, horses, ventures, I mean, et cetera, et cetera. And so that is why it's going to be that he's going to try to attempt to go and try to catch some more headlines in July of 1863. And so you see the start of the beginning of this raid down here at the bottom at Sparta, Tennessee. And they start going up through here and all the way up. Let's back this up a little bit. John Hunt Morgan is under orders to go into Kentucky. He originally is allowed to have 1,500 men to take on this raid. He requests 2,000. 1,500 men can go up here, and what Braxton Bragg thinks he's going to do is take Louisville right here, or at least threaten it if he doesn't do it. What does that do? That draws the Union troops off of Bragg and all the way up through this railroad, which I don't have through here. Well, Morgan comes back, as I said, and he requests 2,000 men to go. Bragg allows him 2,000 men, and then Morgan, to show you the mentality of this guy, decides he'll take 2,500, or basically his whole command. Now, this is where it gets real tricky, and you can get on John Hunt Morgan, you find mixed opinions. Braxton Bragg told him, you're going to Louisville. That's where you're going. And you're going to raid that railroad. John Hunt Morgan never had any intentions of going to Louisville. He needed 2,500 men because 1,500 can do Louisville. But 2,500 can take you where? Can take you all the way up into Indiana, right? And that's what he's aiming to do. They're going to take him up into Indiana. And so, that's where he heads. Now, the Union column, they're getting used to Morgan coming up into Kentucky. They send a column of 3,000 Union cavalry to try to cut him off in central Kentucky, but they're moving too fast. Now, I don't have it on here, but right in the middle of Kentucky is a river called the Green River. And they get to the Green River before the Union troops do, and they cut them off before they can cut them off. And once Morgan is across through here, he fords the Green River. Of course, he destroys the ferries, which puts more time between him and that pursuing Union column. Eventually, they're going to get to Brandenburg right up here, and they're going to get to the Ohio River. Now, there's not a bridge at Brandenburg. There's not. So what is he going to do? He's going to flag over some steamboats. Why? Because that's the last thing they ever expect is Confederates on the Ohio River. And so he gets 2 steamboats to come over. He pull over to the Ohio River, and he forwards his command across through there, all the way over. Can you imagine how long that took? It took him almost 24 hours in order to accomplish that. But can you imagine putting 2,500 people into the middle of enemy territory? He's going to do that. And then deciding that he's going to take off across Ohio. I don't know. He's gambling, to say the least. He left Braxton Bragg's right flank wide open, but he's pulling Union cavalry with him. Now, he crosses Brandenburg. He gets into here. He fights a short, I don't want to call them, glorify them as battles. He fights a skirmish with about 1,000 militia right here outside. How do you say that? Cordon? Cordon. And he goes up through here. Now, look what he does. He splits his command up. He feints in different ways, in different areas. They actually had a woodcut of his command entering Salem. I don't know if you can read that. But that's them entering right through here. And what is he doing? He's throwing the command off. What is that telegraph operator doing? He's getting on the telegraph lines and he's sending word to Louisville that what is Morgan doing? He's headed where? He is headed toward Cincinnati, or he is headed toward Louisville. All right, so what are the Union forces doing? They're going in the wrong direction. Now, you like that? That's not Clint Eastwood. What's the only movie John Wayne was a Confederate? True Grit?
It's True Grit, yeah.
Was it True Grit? That was The Searchers.
Oh, Searchers too. Oh.
That's John Wayne. He has an airport named after him. Union cavalry's in pursuit of John Hunt Morgan. 3,000 men are going to pull up right next to Bradenton, Kentucky, and they're going to be hot on the trail of John Hunt Morgan as they're coming out through here. When he crosses into Indiana, instantly, ladies and gentlemen, the governor of Indiana is going to call out who? The militia, and they're going to start in hard pursuit. What they're going to be trying to do, ladies and gentlemen, is corner him in. And so crossing here, ladies and gentlemen, you can see the route now. They're coming up through here and all the way through Indiana. See them headed towards Cincinnati? Right through here. All right, so 3,000 Union troops are on his tail. He's got roughly around 60 to 65,000 Indiana militiamen that are forming. I'm not saying they're in front of him, and I'm not saying they're in southern Indiana, but that is what is eventually called up in order to combat him right here. And so they just keep galloping. In a matter of 6 days, they cover 186 miles. You can average that out. That's a lot of bulls, to say the least. As they're coming across Indiana, they're wearing out the horse stock, and they're going to replenish it. So where are you going to get horses from? Now this is where it was interesting to me. The horses, ladies and gentlemen, are going to come obviously from Indiana. But what is Kentucky known for? It's known for horse flesh, and Indiana is not. So what are the type horses that John Hunt Morgan is getting? That's right. He's getting draft horses. He's getting plow horses. And nevertheless, ladies and gentlemen, these horses can't stay up with men that are galloping approximately 30 miles a day. They just can't do it. He also apparently at some point, going through one of these towns, he comes across a pork factory, and he and his men steal hundreds of hams. And so as the Union pursuers are trying to find him across Indiana, as the hams got hot and they started to rot, the men started to discard the hams, and so what do? The Union pursuers follow the hams all the way down the road. Yeah. Yeah, so they're after him. On the morning of July 18th, Morgan sensed, oh, by the way, that, ladies and gentlemen, is how you fill in for 2 pages of missing information. Thank you very much. Thank you. Now that is called a high wire act without a net, right there. Totally off. And I'm back on time. All meant to do that. On the morning of July 18th, Morgan sensed the pursuit closing in on him, and Morgan turned east from Haynesville and headed toward Middleport. Is that on there? Nope. In an effort to reach the Ohio River and friendly territory. So he's headed through here. He's being harrowed by now. These horses are starting to give out. Heavy resistance, though, along the way convinced Morgan to ford the Ohio further upstream at a place called Buffington Island. Upon arrival that evening, the Confederates discovered a small contingent of Ohio militia guarding the crossing. There was a delay before the militia retreated, and now Morgan discovered the Ohio itself, at almost flood stage. These 2 things combined to allow the Union pursuit to close. On the foggy morning of July 19th, Henry Judah, who was in command of that Union cavalry pursuing Morgan, finally caught up with him. And his 1,100 troopers attacked from the north at Buffington Island, while simultaneously Edward Hobson and his 450 troopers closed from the west. In the initial fighting, Major Daniel McCook, the 65-year-old father of the famous Fighting McCooks, was mortally wounded, and Judah's vanguard was surprised and routed. By 6:30, 2 brigades of dismounted men from Hobson's division attacked from the west, while Judah's reformed men drove in from the north. The Union artillery of both federal pincers created a crossfire that was very effective. Here's the guns down here, and there's the guns up here. So you see what they're doing? They're shooting this way and they're shooting this way. And the Confederates are trying to, well, this is not a good position. And what are these little things right here? Gunboats. That's not good either, especially if you're in red, right there. So Morgan deployed his men in an L-shaped defensive line while he tried to extricate his men out to the north, which is the top of the map. 2 Union gunboats, the USS Moose and the Allegheny Belle, lent their mettle to the fray from the rear. The best data suggests that Morgan lost 57 killed, 63 wounded, and 71 captured here, including his brother-in-law, Basil Duke. If you're looking to name a child, over here, if you're looking to name a child, I suggest Basil. What a name, right there. Even looks like a basil. Another 570 cavalrymen were captured in the next 24 hours along the escape route. What is that from? The horses are giving out. It's catching them. And Morgan's remaining men, numbering about 1,100 of the 1,800 engaged, continued in a northerly direction along the Ohio River. So we started here, up all the way through here, skirted Cincinnati, got to Buffington Island, and then when they can't cross the river, what are they doing? They're turning this way. They're going up this way. About 12 miles upstream at Reedsville, 300 Confederates managed to cross the Ohio to safety. Now I like this about John Hunt Morgan. He's in the middle of the stream trying to cross his command. As I said just a second ago, 300 have already crossed, and the Union gunboats show up. Now the rest of his command, what is that, approximately 1,500 men, are on the Ohio shore. John Hunt Morgan's in the middle of the river, and John Hunt Morgan, instead of going into West Virginia, turns back and goes into Ohio, because that's where the majority of his men are. He did not desert his men. That is why, the reason I'm pointing this out to you, ladies and gentlemen, is that is the reason that these men will follow John Hunt Morgan across the Ohio River, because they believed in him. He would never go anywhere he would never send them anywhere he would not go personally. And so he turns back around. Now you watch what happens to him as a result of this decision. The remnants of 800 men eventually turned north toward Benton, Hocking, Athens, Perry, Morgan. Where's my Ohio friend over there? Muskingum, Noble, Guernsey, there we go. Harrison, Jefferson, Carroll, and Columbiana counties. Just stay out of Franklin. Along the way, Morgan fought Union soldiers and Ohio militia at Cheshire, Eagleport, Washington, and Wintersville. None of these skirmishes were decisive, but Morgan continued to lose men who could not keep up with the fast pace. Southwest of Salinsville, Union cavalry under the command of Major W.B. Way engaged in a running battle with Morgan's men that cost 100 more in killed, wounded, and captured of his remaining 475. 3 miles west of West Point in Columbiana County, Major G.W. Rue's Union cavalry surrounded Morgan's remaining men and captured the general and 364 of his command. The capitulation occurred about 2 p.m. on July 26, 1863. In the end, the raid tied up 100,000 Union troops from their normal routine for 3 weeks and delayed the advance of General Burnside into East Tennessee. It also gave a much-needed morale boost to the Confederacy civilians right after Vicksburg and Gettysburg. The raid struck fear in the minds of Ohioans and Indianans, along with 4,400 Ohioans alone that filed property damage claims. Here, wait a minute, don't put your phone up. You want a picture of this too. Right there. Amounting to $678,915, of which, to show you what I can do with notes, the government paid $576,225 worth of claims. However, the raid overall did not cause any significant harm to the transportation and communication sectors. And of course, the Confederacy lost 2,400 cavalrymen to boot, which is very hard to replace. At the insistence of the Ohio governor, the 68 Confederate officers from Morgan's command were housed in the Ohio State Penitentiary in Columbus like common criminals. This turned out to be, though, the first big break for Morgan and his men because they had better living conditions and quote-unquote more freedom, if that's not an oxymoron, than a military prison, at least at first. Now, Morgan and his officers were incarcerated in a building 400 feet in length and 40-odd feet wide with approximately maybe 40 feet in height. Individual cells were now you think about this, individual cells were 3.5 feet wide and 7 feet long. Yeah. Prisoners were confined in their cells from 7 o'clock at night to breakfast. And they were punished for the slightest infractions. One of the things that probably drove John Hunt Morgan mad is they used to deliver, the mail would come in and for the officers, and they would give them the empty envelopes. Oh, yeah. They don't treat you right in Ohio, I can tell you. All right, so I was over at this. I was over at the James Garfield house. Very nice staff. They were having Civil War weekend, and so I'm over there, and I'm there for the black powder. They're shooting some muskets over there. So I have with me at the event. One of the groups was the 8th Ohio Volunteer Infantry, which I'm giving you a nice shout out right now, okay? So this guy tells me this story while I'm at the Garfield house. So he has on his tag, because he's the captain, right? He has on his tag the abbreviation because he's really proud. 8 OVI, all right? So he tells me this story that he's in Ohio one day and he's sitting at this red light and he says this hippie pulls up beside him in this van. And apparently in Ohio, they don't call them DUIs. They call them OVIs. And this hippie pulls up beside him and rolls down the window, and he leans out the window and he goes, "Yeah, man, flown it, dude, flown it." Thank you. Thank you. What'd that have to do with anything? There you go, OVI. It's a misunderstanding. So the weeks rocked along, and various escape plans, as you can imagine, were debated and cast aside. But one day, fellow raider Captain Thomas Hines noticed that his bottom-level cell floor stayed dry. Interesting. Cell floor stays dry. No moisture. Why is that? So he had a hunch that there must be an air shaft somewhere underneath there. His suspicions were soon confirmed by small talk with the deputy warden. After reading Les Miserables, did I say that right? Hines came about with a plan to tunnel out, and General Morgan approved the plan and laughingly referred to Hines as, quote, the Count of Monte Cristo. A little classic literature here for you and everything. All right. Table knives were stolen. This is actually a picture of Morgan's men in the prison, by the way. Table knives were stolen from the mess hall and sharpened to punch through the concrete floor with lookouts posted, of course, to warn of the guards coming up. I failed to look up there and see if you were looking at that phone or not. You aren't, are you? Garrick. Sorry about that. Hines began digging on November 4th. What did he discover? 6 inches of concrete with another 6 layers of bricks beneath this. You can get through it. You want to. They disposed of the smaller debris inside handkerchiefs, while the larger pieces were hidden inside Heinz' mattress. Dust and mortar pieces were put inside the, well, that was a lumpy mattress, wasn't it? Dust and mortar pieces were put inside the coal stove. They start tunneling out of there. From the main tunnel, he's digging toward the yard, okay, which is the interior of the prison. He's not digging to the outside of the prison. He's digging toward the inside of the prison. Well, once they got the tunnel done, let's say that the wall he's aiming for is over here. Well, they're digging this main tunnel. Well, let's say they have to go 7 or 8 feet. You have to make it big enough to put to allow a man through there. Well, if this is the cell that I'm standing in, of course, then the adjacent cells would be to the left and the right, okay? And so what would they do? Once they finished that, they started tunneling to the left and the right. And they started tunneling in this direction. They started tunneling in this direction. But this is where it differed from the first. The men in the other cells that were adjacent to them never broke through the concrete. There was only one hole that was allowed for the tunnel. That was in Heinz' cell. So everybody, they had various diggers, 5 or 6 men doing it, and they worked in shifts. But they would descend into there, and they would work, I don't know what their shift was, an hour or two, and in between guard rotations. And they eventually, I don't know how they measured it, but they eventually got the tunnels under those adjacent cells. And this all comes into play when they get ready to spring it. All right? So they started this thing on November 4th, and they finished it on November 24th. Yeah, they move it. Heinz had a carpet bag with him. Apparently he was allowed to keep that, which is basically their period suitcase. And he kept the carpet bag over the hole that was on. But all it took was a guard coming in there and inspecting the cell for them to discover the tunnel. But it never happened. And I'm going back. Oh, I forgot I had this. It's going back to, being in a state prison. In a military prison, that probably would never happen. What's the one thing you don't do? At an AA meeting. All right. So. There's the guy that went to the AA meeting. All right, so they get these tunnels done. Since only the officers on the first floor could escape, the following 6 were chosen: General Morgan, Tom Heinz, Ralph Sheldon, Sam Taylor, L.D. Hockersmith, Jacob Bennett, and J.S. McGee. Dummies were prepared out of stuffed pillows, much like right there. What do you think of that, yeehaw? You like that, huh? Mm-hmm. And old Heinz left behind a note, which I'm sure went over like a lead balloon. With a change of commandants coming soon and fresh inspections on the way, the night of November 27th was chosen as the time to break out of the prison. Fortunately for Morgan and his cohorts, it rained, making the guards and the dogs to seek shelter. The men broke through the concrete to the air tunnel, slipped inside, and crawled to the main shaft. What do I mean by that? The people in the adjacent cells, the soldiers in those cells, did not break through the floor into the tunnel until the night of November 27th. So that floor was intact all the way up until that point. Does that make sense to everybody? So that's how they hit it. All right, so they broke through the concrete, slipped inside, and crawled to the main shaft. Then they made their way to the yard, breaking through the last few inches of earth. They were outside their building and making their way across the yard. Anybody want to? I didn't read this to you because I didn't want to slaughter that French. Does anybody know what it says? Patience is something. Fruit of, I guess, patience. Well, so much for you learned people. Somebody will write me, right? Tell me. Making their way across the yard, They used a rope with a modified fireplace iron as a hook to scale the inner wall. And once they all got up on the inner wall, they pulled the rope up, and they used the rope to scale down the other wall. And they made their way through the prison. I tried to get an overview, but I could never find a map of what the penitentiary would have looked like. But somehow they made, so I don't exactly know the exact route, but somehow they made their way to the women's section and the gate that led into that area. And that's where they made their final escape. They threw the hook over the gate, shimmied up, got everybody over, and then they discovered that they could not get the hook off. And it's dangling on the wall. And so they had a conundrum. Do you crawl up there, make all this noise trying to get that hook off, or you're outside the prison, do you start booking it? What I want you to imagine right now, ladies and gentlemen, can you imagine how those eardrums, how much adrenaline was going off in those guys' ears right now? Crazy. But the Raiders were outside. Absolutely, positively, you could put that movie on with 15 minutes left and I will watch it. Absolutely a fantastic movie. I don't care who you are. Right there. If you haven't seen it, I won't do anything. Get busy living. Okay, so when the men got outside, they split up and they shucked their homemade loose outer garments to reveal civilian clothes and then went their separate ways. Morgan had managed to hide away some currency when he entered prison, and he used $15 of that hidden currency to bribe a guard beforehand to obtain a train schedule. I mean, if a prisoner hands you $15, which is a lot of money back then, and he doesn't ask for a poster of Raquel Welch. Morgan partnered, when they split up, Morgan partnered with Captain Hines. The indomitable captain had previously written a sister in Kentucky, and she had sent a book. Somehow they got a code going. And she sent a book that also had cash secreted in it. Somewhere they glued it back on and everything. And so, yeah, it's pretty cool. And so he had a little cash on him. The two went down to the train station and bought a train ticket for Cincinnati. Would you think this was going to be some bold escape dashing across? No, they're going to ride the train. You don't want to sweat. Upon boarding, Morgan sat down by a Union major, cordially offered him a sip of brandy. As the train left town, the major pointed at the penitentiary and said, "That's where Morgan's men were there." Morgan reportedly retorted, "I hope they will keep him as safe as he is now." Now, nearing Cincinnati at dawn, Morgan and Hines feared that their escape had been detected by now, and so they jumped off the train early on the outskirts of town and made their way to Ludlow Ferry on the Ohio River. There they paid for a skiff ride across the river and into somewhat friendly Kentucky. Southern sympathizers took it from there, and eventually Morgan reached the Confederate lines at Dalton, Georgia. Upon his return, Morgan was hailed as the returning hero. Even the Yankees couldn't hold him in prison, they said, not even a penitentiary. And John eventually made his way to Maddie, and I'm sure they had a warm reunion. What are y'all laughing about? I still want to believe. I do. Maddie had given birth to, check this out, Maddie had given birth to a baby girl the day that Morgan escaped from prison. But, unfortunately, the baby died. Only you would appreciate that. They pledged to each other after that to never be separated again. In January of 64, I think this is where this picture is taken, the couple went to Richmond, Virginia for a 3-month stay where they were feted everywhere. And folks, when I say feted, I'm talking about mobbed. I'm talking about having to have somebody get in between them so they could get out the door type stuff. You know, I'm talking about laying in your bed and having crowds chant for you to come out on the balcony type stuff. You know, I mean, this guy was a celebrity. And, you know, probably didn't buy a drink the whole time he was there. But everything has to come to an end. And if you recall what I said earlier, Braxton Bragg didn't tell him to go do that. And, you know, they're going to do something about that. And so they're going to send him to Saltville, Virginia, which is near Abington, which is somewhere near where Bristol, which is basically what you call backwater in there, which we're going to learn about here shortly, of course, ribbons and all. Now, that's where he goes. One of the most undesirable locations in the South. People were shocked by the haggard appearance and physical health of Morgan. His reconstituted command, and I don't mean that personally, I mean his military command, did not contain at this time the same quality of soldiers as the pre-raid days from Ohio. He had lost his best men. And I hate to tell you this, but it's pretty much true of any war. The longer a war goes, the quality of soldier generally goes down. If you look at the Roman Empire, if you look at the American Civil War, my ancestor entered in 64, whatever. So, write me any letters here. You look at Ukraine, and so the soldiers which Morgan had in 64, they're Some of his command conducted raids throughout the summer and into the East Tennessee and Kentucky. Morgan went up one last time. But during these raids, they were essentially pillaging and inflicting numerous civilian casualties. On June 8th of 1864, soldiers robbed a bank in Mount Sterling, Kentucky, of $72,000. Throughout August of 64, Morgan attempted to clear his name from an impending court-martial for not investigating the robbery. I wonder why he didn't investigate. And on August 30th, he was suspended from command by the Confederate War Department. Well, it's just that's not going to get in the way of a good story, right? So Morgan just ignores the order. And on September the 3rd, he takes his command east to Greenville, Tennessee, where they established headquarters. In the early hours of September 4th, 1864, the same day that Atlanta, Georgia fell, Federal cavalry raided the town, and Morgan was shot as he resisted capture in the garden outside the house. Now, it is rumored, there's a lot of theories that go into that, ladies and gentlemen, but it is some people say that, for instance, one of the last telegrams, or maybe the last telegram that Morgan sent Maddie, he put the code word in there, I'm not going to get this right, mitzvah, which is, I'm getting to some arcane Old Testament right here, but it's where a pact was made in the Old Testament. And some historians feel that what that meant was that Morgan had agreed that they would never be captured again. So when the Union cavalry surprised him at this house in Greenville, Tennessee, his staff, they throw up his arms, but Morgan takes off running. And he's shot, as you can see, where that X is. They pretty much they paraded him around, cut souvenirs off of him. You can still find swatches of his pajamas, they cut little swatches and send him home, so forth. And threw him over the back of a mule and paraded him around town. He was threw him in a ditch eventually. But you can imagine, my point is, what kind of shape John Hunt Morgan's body was in when it returned to Maddie. I mean, this is her hero to wrap this love story up right here. I mean, this is how they come out, how they come back. The following day, his body was transported under a flag of truce back to his wife in Abington, Virginia, where his first funeral was held. A week later, thousands of mourners attended a state funeral in Hollywood Cemetery in Richmond. And Maddie went from wife to widow in 630 days. Yeah. 7 months later, after John Hunt Morgan's death, Maddie bore a daughter and named that daughter Johnny. What else? 2 days before Lee's surrender at Appomattox. In 1868, Morgan's brother transported his body back to Lexington. I might add that this Thomas Morgan, that was on page 7, was killed on the Ohio Raid 2 in Kentucky in a skirmish as they were headed toward the Ohio River. Ironic, isn't it? But anyway, in 1868, Morgan's other brother transported his body back to Lexington, where nearly 2,000 people attended a third funeral at Lexington Cemetery on April 17th of 1868. And I thank President Wayne Motts for that picture right there. So what are we to say about John Hunt Morgan? It's the old debate, ladies and gentlemen, of what the Southern people needed and what they had to have in order to remain a viable nation. There are some historians that feel that here at Gettysburg we have this debate sometimes about whether the South should have stayed on the defensive. James Longstreet comes to mind about that. Whether they should have stayed on the defensive and wore the North down. There are other historians that feel that the Southern people would have never tolerated a defensive-minded war, that the Southern people were more offensive-minded people. In other words, they wanted aggressive generals. If you go back to the beginning of the talk and you take Sir Walter Scott and you take the Cavalier days and this romantic Old South, Gone with the Wind type nostalgia of, or look at it, John Hunt Morgan is going to embody that. He's everything that you want to do. When you dream of being a soldier, you don't dream of slogging 15 miles a day in a wool uniform with your feet hurting, carrying 30 pounds of gear while it's raining on you, and you've got lice all over you. You picture yourself as a dashing cavalier who's going to come out of galloping into town with the ladies flaunting their handkerchiefs from the windows right there as you gallop on by, heralding your arrival. Glory, people. Glory is what you seek, or is what you dream of until you meet the stark reality of war. John Hunt Morgan never left that. Despite war, you know how they all go off in 1861. In 1864, he's still hunting that glory. In 1863, he's breaking out of a state penitentiary. I mean, what more do you want out of life? Right? And so, because of that, ladies and gentlemen, you get a statue. You used to get a statue. I don't know where they put him now, but that's that right there. But anyway, I thought that you might find it interesting. This door, one last thing, I'll let you go. This door right here, ladies and gentlemen, is that president of the Gettysburg Foundation, Wayne Motts. They tore the old Ohio State Penitentiary down. Unfortunately, I don't know why they did that, but because it would have made a great museum. But they were about to throw this away. And Wayne Mott's daddy was there. And he says, do you mind if I have this door right here? And this door, ladies and gentlemen, I thought I had it, is the one that, not to the cell, but to the cell block. in which John Hunt Morgan was there. You can still see that door at his museum in Ohio. Read something on him. Ladies and gentlemen, John Hunt Morgan. Thank you very much.
All right, so Chris will be happy. I'm only 15 minutes late. I'm going to take 10, 15-minute break. Why don't we reconvene at 3 o'clock? I'm not going to use, for those of you got to go, I thank you for coming. I really do. For those of you that got another 15 minutes in you, we'll go to 3:15, 3:20, something like that. I have a short presentation by one of the Addressing Gettysburg staff on William Averill. Did I say that right, Cameron? Right, and he's even went out and bought himself a nice sport coat for you people. And he's going to make his Gettysburg debut in approximately 12 minutes. So please stick around for that 15-minute program.
If you're a lover of history, then go to trhistorical.com. There you'll find apparel, drinkware, decor, and more featuring a wide range of interests from the ancient world to the Cold War. Looking to make an impression with the perfect gift? Well, TR Historical now offers gift cards and a vintage wrapping service for a truly unique presentation. And our listeners will receive 10% off plus free shipping in the U.S. when you use promo code GBERG1863. So go to trhistorical.com, TR Historical, for the love of history. Our favorite bookstore in Gettysburg is For the Historian, located at 42 York Street. It's because they have the best selection of Civil War books in Gettysburg, both new and used. And online, they have even more to choose from. And if the Civil War isn't your thing, that's not a problem. This is For the Historian, after all. They cover history from the ancient world to the 21st century with a strong selection of World War II and American Revolution books. It's astounding how many thousands of titles from Osprey, Savas Beatty, UNC Press, and more they have in their store. And that's because, well, they have a warehouse too. And that's where they keep all the books that are available online at forthehistorian.com. And folks, if you go to forthehistorian.com now and order books until you're blue in the face, be sure you mention that you heard about them on Addressing Gettysburg in the Note to Seller box, and they will refund your shipping costs. And if you prefer to stop by when you're in town, well, you could do that too. Just mention Addressing Gettysburg at checkout, and they'll take 20% off the retail price of your item. So go to forthehistorian.com or stop by 42 York Street, or you can call them at 717-685-5207. That's forthehistorian.com or 717-685-5207.
You've heard us promote various ways that you can help us keep the show going, but one way we haven't pushed too much is our sutlery at addressinggettysburg.com/shop. That's a shame because we have designs over there by talented artists like Ty DeWitt of 1863 Designs and Mike Stretch of the Heritage Depot. So now we're promoting it. Buying shirts, hoodies, mugs, and other items from our sutlery not only helps us keep the lights on, but it also helps guys like Ty and Mike, and it helps spread the word about the show every time you wear an item or you sip from your mug. So head over to addressinggettysburg.com/shop and grab some merch. It's the perfect Christmas gift for the Gettys nerd in your family. That's addressinggettysburg.com/shop.
Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center, Gettysburg's premier museum, is housed in the historic Lutheran Seminary building constructed in 1832, a witness to the first day of battle. The museum's 3 floors of exhibits connect visitors to the dilemmas that led to the Civil War, provide a powerful and personal view of the battle's first day, and explore one of the battlefield's largest hospitals. No visit to Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center is complete without a guided tour of the building's famous cupola, where on the eve of battle, officers and civilians saw thousands of Confederate soldiers' campfires burning to the west, and Brigadier General John Buford watched for vital federal reinforcements as fighting erupted on the morning of July 1st. Today, you can stand where Buford stood and discover how this view helped chart the course of the Battle of Gettysburg. Your trip to Gettysburg is not complete without a serious visit to Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center, Gettysburg's premier museum. Purchase tickets online at seminaryridgemuseum.org or call 717-339-1300. To get tickets or a cupola tour, listeners may call or walk in and mention Addressing Gettysburg, or by ordering online using the promo code AG1863 for 20% off. Seminary Ridge Museum and Education Center. It began here.
There's a devil to pay.
Need a Corps badge or other insignia for your uniform? Then check out the Badge Maker. Here's what some of his satisfied customers had to say. Miranda said, "I ordered an identification disc from Joe and it's fantastic. He hand stamped it exactly as I wanted. It has a great rough on-campaign feel to it and was reasonably priced to boot." Greg said, "My unit has purchased from him in the past. Quality badges and good service." And Jerry S. says, "The Badge Maker is the go-to place for accurate replica Civil War badges. Visit CivilWarCorpsBadges.com and attach a message with your order saying you heard about him on Addressing Gettysburg."
Hey, Gettysburg business owners. Winter is just around the bend, and you know what that means. No tourists. But just because people aren't coming to you doesn't mean you can't bring your business to them. If you ship, you're still in the game. And if you're a seasonal business, the time to advertise for your next season is in the off-season when people are making their plans. So what's an affordable yet highly effective way of reaching those people? Well, it's not radio. It's not TV, and it's certainly not print. Step out of the Jurassic era of advertising and run an ad on Addressing Gettysburg. We just reached 1 million downloads, and we're growing by the tens of thousands every month. Beyond that, our audience is happy to support those who support their favorite podcast. So email sales@AddressingGettysburg for more information about advertising on our show. We look forward to helping your business grow. That's sales@AddressingGettysburg.com.
And now, an Addressing Gettysburg exclusive, Cam Mallow.
All right, so I've got half the family. I've got half of West Virginia sitting right here. So what we have right here is probably the most enthusiastic person I've ever met that wanted absolutely positively loved Gettysburg. And I mean mental health is time. I mean, just get down in the dumps. His name is Cameron Mallow, and he is from, by God, West Virginia, as you're about to find out in just a moment. He is a graduate of Shepherd College with a history degree, and his life dream is to work here at this park. He has volunteered here. He has gone to work at places that he didn't want to work, such as the National Mall, such as Fort Union. Fort Union, which is closer to Canada than it is civilization. Right there. All for the love of Gettysburg. And so what we're doing here today is we're going to allow Cameron an opportunity to speak to you for about 15, 20 minutes about a segment of cavalry operations in West Virginia. Cameron's great love, or second love, next to Gettysburg, is West Virginia Civil War history. And I had to talk him out of bringing all of his flags today. He did hit me up this morning. But to tie it into the larger talk, when Cameron started feeding me information on John Hunt Morgan, or at least the latter part of it, in 1864, and I said to Cameron, I said, well, why don't you come and talk about it? So what I glossed over, when Morgan escaped out of prison, he went to Richmond, Virginia for 3 months, and in the spring of 64, he goes to take command of Southwest Virginia, the Department of Southwest Virginia. Cameron is going to give you an overview of one of the Union raids that came down from West Virginia, in which John Hunt Morgan was part of. But the talk is focused on a Union general instead, Union General Averill, which he has done a lot of research on. So without further ado, if that makes sense to you, how about a nice, warm, first-time welcome for the #1 West Virginian of all time, Mr. Cameron Mallow.
All right. Hit that. Okay. Test your sound.
Test. Yeah.
How's it sound up there? All right.
Well, a few weeks ago, right before Christmas, I was talking to Mr. Atkinson over here about John Hunt Morgan. I got real excited, and I told him about Buffington Island, and then I got talking about Averill fighting against John Hunt Morgan down in the western southern end of Virginia. And William Averill, of course, is a very well-known Union cavalry officer from West Virginia. So the purpose of my talk, of course, is to talk about the face-off against John Hunt Morgan during the Civil War and the May 1864 expedition against the Virginia-Tennessee Railroad, and discuss this Union General Averill. First thing to pick off is with a quote from one of the men that fought with General Averill, Major Theodore Lang of what was the 3rd West Virginia Infantry, then the 3rd Mounted Infantry, and then later on became the 6th West Virginia Cavalry. The best testimony to an act is that of the one saw the act done. A great neglect exists at this time in relation to the history of the part taken in the great Civil War by loyal West Virginians, who stood so firmly for the preservation of the Union. William Averill. He was born November 5th, 1832 in, astonishingly, Cameron, New York, where he worked as a drugstore clerk. Averill graduated West Point 1855, was commissioned the 2nd lieutenant in the U.S. Army Mounted Rifles. He was, prior to the Civil War, his earliest duties were at Jefferson Barracks, Missouri, and then later, just right up the road here, at the U.S. Army Cavalry School in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. When the war broke out in 1861, he was appointed the colonel of the 3rd Pennsylvania Cavalry. Give you a little background in his earlier duties prior to him coming to West Virginia. He fought following the Union defeat at the Battle of Chancellorsville and the Stoneman's Raid of 1863. General Hooker, who would have him relieved and would be sent to the Department of West Virginia. And then on August 26th, 27th, he would fight the Battle of White Sulphur Springs. And in a quote of that battle, he would fight Colonel George S. Patton, grandfather of famous World War II general. After many hours of fighting, Averill was forced to retreat from the battlefield. A private Frank Reeder of the 2nd West Virginia Mounted Infantry gave a great account of how Averill extracted his force off the battlefield. The Corps pioneers plied their axes with great effort upon many large trees near the road, cutting them in two. As the troops were withdrawn, Battery G, with their guns double shot with their last canister they had, grimly waited the expected advance of the exhausted foe. As they came on with their usual yell, the battery boys let them have it red hot. Then, limbering their guns with horses that they had just gotten during the night, pulled out at a trot. Pioneers made their final cuts with the trees, fell across the road, completely blocking it. As Confederate cavalry dashed, they were greeted with a volley from the rear guard lying behind the fallen trees. Now, why is all this important? Averill was willing to take risk and take on the riskiest missions that the Union Army had to win the war against the Confederacy. And these few examples of his early war will really show his tactic skills from when he learned from being out west to what would apply to him in 1864 when he would fight John Hunt Morgan. Later of the fall in 63, on November 6, he would fight against General Echoes and General William Mudwall Jackson. And Averill would win the Battle of Droop Mountain but would not reach his destination of the Virginia-Tennessee Railroad. But then during December 1863, he would go off again on another raid, and his goal is to reach Salem, Virginia on the Virginia-Tennessee Railroad. He would start in Petersburg, West Virginia at Fort Mulligan, and then would make it, and then would reach Salem, Virginia about mid-December, and then return to Beverly, West Virginia on Christmas Day. He would escape capture from Imboden, Grumble Jones, Fitzhugh Lee, Echoes, and McCausland. 5 Confederate forces would not catch him. And also Jackson. At Craig's Creek, Frank Reeder gave another great account of the daring cavalier. And this is a picture of Frank Reeder. And a painting of Averill during the return trip from the Salem raid in 1863 in the snow mountains of West Virginia. At a place called Craig's Creek, Frank Reeder gives another great account of this dashing cavalier. General Averill, without any attendance of aides and staff, came galloping up and took a survey of the ford. This one appeared more dangerous than any other that preceded it. The general was fearful that the horses in their weakened condition would be unable to swim the current. He applied the spurs vigorously to his own horse, and rider and horse dashed into the stream. Many anxious hearts watched the desperate struggle of a brave man with the mad current. He reached the opposite shore and cheered the men, and the men cheered him. He acknowledged their compliment by lifting his hat and saying, "Come on, boys," and rode off hastily in the direction of Newcastle. In the spring of '64, Robert E. Lee even quoted, "We must be prepared for any attempts by Averill of already his successes of his raids in Virginia." In the spring of '64, William Averill and George Crook would attack the salt mines in Saltville, Virginia, and the Virginia-Tennessee Railroad Bridge at Dublin Depot. The salt mines at Saltville supplied most of the salt to the Confederacy, which was used to preserve meat for the soldiers. During '64, the salt mines produced 2/3 of the salt for the Confederacy. The raid into the land of the Confederacy was part of a multi-pronged offensive strategy put together by General Grant in Virginia. General Grant would attack Robert E. Lee and the Northern Army of Virginia. Union General Francis Sigel would attack down the Shenandoah Valley. Then finally, General Crook and Averill would make a raid and attack the Virginia and Tennessee Railroad. Averill departed May 5th, 1864 from Logan County Courthouse in West Virginia. As you can see here on this map, Charleston up in the top, Averill would parallel Crook and then head west. Crook would then turn, head east, and would fight the famous Battle of Cloyd's Mountain. On May 6th, Averill reached Oceana, West Virginia. Then May 7th, he would make it to Virginia, only 2 days from the Saltvilles at Saltville. On May 9th, Averill arrived at the salt mines only to find the Confederate forces under John Hunt Morgan and William Jones were already there. Finding that his way blocked to the salt mines, Averill led his force eastward towards Wrightsville. So May 5th, May 6th, May 7th entered into Virginia. May 9th went to Saltville. John Hunt Morgan would later write of what happened at Saltville. Averill fought his men elegantly, but our boys gave them no time to form. If I had been 1 hour later, this place and the lead mines would have been lost. If we would have had 2 more hours of daylight, we would have captured the whole command. At Wrightsville, Virginia, Averill collided at Cove Mountain near Crockett's Cove against a combined force of John Hunt Morgan and William Jones. During the Battle of Cove Mountain, Averill's forces mounted many attacks on the Confederate position. As the fight proceeded on Averill, the 14th Pennsylvania and 1st West Virginia Cavalry regiments drove the advance guard of the Confederate forces. When the Union cavalry came across to the gap, Confederate dismounted cavalry fired on them from both sides of the gap. Being hit by fire from the Confederate cavalry, Averill's force fell back. It was at this time a member of Company H, 2nd West Virginia Cavalry, climbed a tree and saw Confederate reinforcements arriving. Seeing this, it was reported to Averill, who then canceled the charge that was getting ready to start. Knowing that the gap couldn't be taken, Averill pulled his forces back and formed a new line of battle. The reason behind this, Averill hoped this would lure Morgan's forces out of the cove. Seeing Averill fall back, Morgan then moved his forces out and attacked Averill's line of battle. The battle cry by the Confederates were, "We are Morgan's men and we will give you hell." The fighting ended at dusk and Averill was able to pull his force away. During the fight, Averill received a slight head wound and was taken to the rear. But after being looked at, he returned to the front. Then at darkness, Averill would pull his men back and head towards Dublin Depot. Author of The Battle of Cloyes Mountain, Virginia, Civil War Battles and Leaders series, Howard McManus wrote about Averill's retreat. And then Cove Mountain's up in the top, Crockett's Gap, Cove Mountain Gap right there, and then Wrightsville. There's only 5 miles separating from the battlefield to where Wrightsville is. Realizing the fight would result only in loss of his command, Averill ordered retreat. For the second night, the Federal command withdrew secretly from a battlefield. He urged his men, weary troops, over rugged mountain passes in the darkness. At about dawn, the cavalry finally reached Crab Orchard. For half a day, the troops rested. Then, hoping to join Crook, they pushed through driving rain towards Dublin Depot. On arriving on May 11th, Averill's troops stumbled into Dublin to find Crook had already advanced towards New River. On the following day, May 12th, the Federal cavalry continued eastward and discovered that heavy rain had swollen the New River in a raging torrent, with Morgan in close pursuit and all bridges destroyed. Averill's column had little choice but to ford the muddy river. The troops plunged their mounts into the struggling rapids, and treacherous currents swept several horses and their death in the deep water. This is at Crockett's Cove Presbyterian Church, which still stands today. Ironically, most battlefields, Civil War battlefields in West Virginia and Virginia, a lot of them have been left as they were during the Civil War, with not much change or development on the battlefields. It was at this church he left 114 dead and wounded. 17 of the wounded were left at the church, where local families fed and attended the injured. There's no documented accounts of number of Confederate casualties. And this, of course, marks his retreat from Cove Mountain, May 10th, and then at Wrightsville, the battle. And then May 11th, he was chased by John Hunt Morgan to Dublin Depot. And then at New River, he got the surprise of Morgan was surprised. After reaching Dublin Depot, Averill rested his men and then headed towards the New River, looking for a ford to cross. Knowing Morgan's force was following his force, Averill had to find a river ford. Joseph J. Sutton, a member of the 2nd West Virginia Cavalry, wrote, "The crossing at the New River. I don't recollect having witnessed a more thrilling scene than when I reached that bank and saw men and horses struggling in the surging water. Several men were drowned. After crossing the 7th West Virginia, witnessed the force of Morgan and Jones, baffled and unable to stream the current, which had risen to be impassable." Averill then moved to Christiansburg, where General Averill contacted General Crook and was ordered to destroy the railroad east of town. This was done for 4 miles. The following day, on May 13th, Averill, being a day behind Crook, forced back their supply base to Charleston. So for the 12th, they start back towards their supply base in West Virginia, with plans to join Crook at Union, West Virginia. As Averill moved to Salt Pine Mountain, he discovered that the route was blocked by Confederate forces under William Jackson. Realizing that the route was blocked, Averill once again produced a daring plan to get his forces to safety. Finding a narrow path up the mountain, Averill took his force around the Confederate position and to safety, rejoining Crook's column on May 15th at Union, West Virginia. Once again, Joseph Sutton leaves some writing about the night on the deep deer path on the mountain. We began the ascent of a steep mountain, soon struck the trail and led into a deep, wild, dark ravine, out of which we could not get except by climbing a trail up the face of the steep mountain. It got so dark and rained so hard, and it was slippery, that only way we could keep on the precious mountain path was to hold on to the tail of the horse in front and the rein of the horse behind. God only knows how we got out of that mountain gulch, but we got out sometime towards morning. And these sketches right here demonstrate that that night on the mountain, which is probably one of the most daring feats I've ever encountered in my study of the Civil War. Later that year, Averill would be part of General Hunter's Lynchburg campaign. On August 7th, 1864, Averill would defeat Confederate General McCausland at the small town of Moorefield. Later in the fall, Averill would again be relieved of his command by General Sheridan following the Battle of Fisher's Hill. In 1865, Averill resigned from Union Army on May 18th, 1865. After the war, Averill became an inventor and would be responsible for the creation of asphalt. In closing, author Howard McManus leaves some great words of the 1864 expedition against the Virginia-Tennessee Railroad. The May 1864 expedition against the Virginia-Tennessee Railroad was a relative insignificant excursion within a highly eventful war. Overshadowed by larger armies and more consequential campaigns, it failed to receive public recognition then as now. Nevertheless, the courage and the suffering and the despair of the Civil War soldier emerged vividly from Cloyd's Mountain and the New River Bridge, as from Gettysburg and to Appomattox. Through the years, most of the men who marched and fought and died in this campaign have been forgotten. Now only the mountains remember. When Averill left his command on September 23, 1864, he gave a farewell address. I hereby relinquish the command of the division. In doing so, I request the officers and men accept my sincere thanks for the uniform obedience and respect that has been shown to my orders and the personal kindness that has always extended myself. I shall never forget, my comrades, what I owe you. Whatever or rank I have gained the last year was given to me by his command. Since the 1st of May, we marched over 1,800 miles, 500 comrades who've fallen in 20 battles, attested the devotion with who have done your duty, and 7 battle flags captured, over 1,500 prisoners captured from the enemy expedition. Some of the results of your work and my associates with you will hereafter be among my most cherished memories. I shall read the record of your deeds from day to day with eager interest. My regret in serving the ties that bind us is somewhat lessened by the knowledge that I am leaving you in the hands of a tried and trusty soldier, Colonel W.H. Powell, who commanded the 2nd West Virginia Infantry, in whom the utmost confidence may be placed. I would rather serve in the ranks than leave you, but I am only permitted to say farewell. William W. Averill, Brevet Major General. William Averill, in my parts, is one of the most lesser-known Union commanders, especially cavalry officers out of the Civil War, especially in West Virginia. He was willing to take risk to get to the ultimate goals that was needed to win the war for the Union cause, and he had most confidence in his experience in the West prior to the war and his men, that no matter what kind of trouble they could get in, they could get out of it quick. And he showed that time after time in the years he served in West Virginia during the war, and his brilliant escapes from capture and defeat.
That's good.
Thank you. Any questions for Cam?
I'll ask one.
Go ahead.
So what did leadership have against the general?
In 1962, when he was relieved of his command by General Hooker, it was because he was too cautious. He was always cautious, and he would only follow his orders to the letter. He never would go beyond the orders and would only follow the orders. That same thing would happen to him after the Battle of Fisher's Hill, when Sheridan was expecting him to advance forward, but he did not. He followed his orders to the letter and would not do nothing beyond that unless so ordered. Once his mission was completed, he returned to camp, and Sheridan did not like it, Plus, also, he was a supporter of McClellan, too. And that also kind of pushed Sheridan to get rid of him.
Thank you.
Did I hear another one?
He answered it.
Back row. Oh, yeah.
So how did you get interested in the Civil War?
Well, that goes way back to when I was younger. I don't know how old I was, to be honest, but I saw the movie Gettysburg on TV, and as I got older, I got more knowledge into the Civil War, and growing up, Civil War was something I could always have close to me. Everywhere I went, I always had a Civil War book or taking notes on something, and it's just grown into what it is today.
What else we got? Well, Cameron gets his first experience with awkward silence. Hey, thank you.
Outside of Harper's Ferry, what Civil War sites would you recommend?
Outside of Harper's Ferry, you got Antietam right there, near there. You also have the Battle of Shepherdstown. You have the Siege of Harper's Ferry you can visit. And then there's several little sites all throughout the surrounding area there at Shepherdstown, little markers about, like Mosby attacking the railroad station there near Shepherdstown. There is a ton of little stuff. That's one thing always intrigued me with West Virginia. There's so many little small stuff. You never run out of something new to learn.
About Droop Mountain. Is that a place they can go?
Yeah, Droop Mountain is actually, and then answer up here in the front. Droop Mountain is a state park today you can visit. Very unique battlefield. Some locals claim it as the Gettysburg of West Virginia. And one of the nicknames some reenactors have that attend it is called the Chattanooga of West Virginia, because the Union had to go up the mountainside and had to flank the Confederates that were on top of the mountain. And Averill was able to use the terrain, use his forces to the best knowledge of what they were set for, and was able to win that battle.
Well, there's the true Cameron.
Yes. Tell us about your reenacting. When did you start that?
I started that probably back in 2001 as a young reenactor who showed up in a camp in a little Malta uniform. Some guys took me under their wings, started showing me the proper ropes, and little by little I grew. I learned how to get around to reenactments, and I think this past year made my 24th year as a Civil War reenactor, traveling to places in Ohio, all over West Virginia. Also went out to North Dakota, did some little stuff to Virginia, North Carolina, been Maryland, and also up here in Pennsylvania.
Train whistle?
No.
Cameron does a nice train whistle right now.
Let's hear it. Let's hear it. Let's hear it. Come on, train whistle.
Thank y'all.
Thanks.
You did it. You want to shake my hand?
I was a little nervous there.
I was nervous for you.
I was fine.
I was sitting there, punching my jaw.
Our hearts so stout have got us famed, forsooth 'tis known from whence we came. Wherever we go, they dread the name of Garryowen in glory. Instead of spa or drink down ale and ale, a reckoning on the nail. No man forget shall go to jail from Garryowen in glory. Instead of spa or drink down ale.